is there a line that ICE could cross in order to achieve that goal, in order to achieve the goal of deporting all undocumented immigrants? Is there a line that they could cross to where you would say, hey, you've gone too far?
If ICE kills 2 million Americans in order to deport 2 million illegals, I would say that that's not okay.
Is there any line that they could cross in direct relation to the immigrants themselves? So let's say no American citizen ever gets touched by ICE. Like no harm comes to any American citizen, only harm comes to the immigrants. Is there any line in there that you would say is too far?
No, that sounds pretty based, honestly.
You understand that this logic, your line of logic of do whatever you have to do to them to get them out, eventually there has to come a time where we just have to have a civil war.
Trump is destroying the Constitution. What do you mean by that? I need more clarification.
Yeah, so we are inherently a country, a nation of laws, right? And I think that Trump is trying to burn all that down inherently by violating the law.
So are you referring to like deploying the National Guard without governor's consent, or what?
I'm referring to a lot of things. I mean, that's just I honestly take that to be like a drop in the bucket, if anything. It is probably illegal, but it's a drop in the bucket comparatively to other things we've seen from this administration so far.
I mean, yeah, just because it's a hot topic. I mean, if staying in the country without paperwork is illegal, that should be taken care of. And if it becomes difficult for the federal government to enforce its own laws, then it needs backup to do that. And if states aren't going to provide that backup, then they need to make do with something else. So, I mean, we go back and forth on the specifics of whether or not what he's doing with the National Guard. Like I said, because that's the hot button issue right now. I don't know the specifics of whether or not that's technically illegal or illegal, but I mean, the crime's already been committed, and if there's at a state level, if there isn't a way to do anything about that, then the federal government needs to step in. So,
you're not entirely wrong. I don't know if we're actually talking about the same thing. It sounds like what you're talking about would be super. If you're talking about like national or bringing in the National Guard or the military to enforce immigration law, that would be extremely illegal. But I don't think that that's what you. I don't know if that's what you're trying to get at.
I mean, wasn't the National Guard called in to essentially facilitate ICE doing what they have to do, because with the amount of protesters, it was made difficult for us to.
The purported reason was to bring in the National Guard to protect the ICE agents because they were under attack, so to speak, but not to bring in the National Guard to actually, conduct law enforcement operations. That the military can't be deployed on U.S. soil for law enforcement purposes.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I guess we're splitting hairs at this point.
Yeah, but... I mean, they were brought to protect the stated reason was to protect the ICE agents that they're the ones doing the law enforcement. He's not bringing in them. I mean, so far as I know, I guess it wouldn't be outside. It wouldn't surprise me if I found that out. If we, there was U.S. Marines in California arresting immigrants, I wouldn't, I guess, be overly shocked.
Yeah, I guess I would just say at the state level, especially in places like California, there's such a culture around ignoring immigration law and around essentially facilitating people who aren't here legally, staying here illegally with this kind of quasi protection from the state government. So at the end of the day, I mean, if, again, like I said, what Trump's doing with the National Guard, that's technically, in a legal gray area, or if it's even just flat out illegal. I mean, I will take that illegality over the illegality of millions of people being here without permission to be here. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So would you say you're like a big federal government and small state government type of guy, you're like a not a states' rights kind of guy?
Depends on the issue. Generally speaking, I support a strong federal government. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Just to be clear, we can move on to a different topic. I don't think we're gonna find we have a ton of disagreement in what we're talking about now, but I don't think it's anything that we can actually drill down on or come to an agreement on. Just because, to be clear, that entire argument is a completely an anti-constitutional argument entirely.
What argument? That the federal government should be strong and states should?
No, just the whole anti-states rights thing. So one of the things that you brought up that I hear a lot of people bring up is that is the federal government like having some sort of like moral imperative or some sort of extra excuse to step in when states ignore immigration law, or that it's some sort of I guess I can use I think it was Trump. I almost am positive that it was Trump that suggested that Gavin Newsom should be arrested over these things.
We said that yesterday.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, yeah, you're right. But the states are under no obligation to follow federal immigration law. If a state, if an entire state, if California as a whole were to all come together and agree, like, hey, yeah, we're actually not going to enforce immigration law at all here. If we catch you, if we arrest you for something and you're an undocumented immigrant, we're not gonna, we're not gonna tell ICE. We're gonna like that's entirely within their rights to do so.
Yeah, but then doesn't so you have JD in your username? I'm assuming. Are you like a lawyer or something?
No, that's happy accident or unhappy accident. Somewhere in there. Unrelated.
I'm just asking because if you know more about like legal frameworks than I do, I'm not going to try to.
I would make a very strong argument that I do, but not on the basis of being a lawyer. On the basis of being a fucking nerd.
Well, I mean, I'm kind of trying to talk, like, explain to me like I'm 5-star level. Like, the job of the president, like, basically speaking, is to enforce laws, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying is that and again, like, we could go into the specifics of, like, technically whether it's legal or illegal, but at the end of the day, if the states refuse to enforce federal laws, then it's not acceptable for the president to just, like, sit around and let that happen.
Well, he doesn't have to, yeah. You can, like, the states don't have to enforce federal, like, for instance, if you get arrested by California Highway Patrol and it's determined that you're an undocumented immigrant, that you have, you're not on a green card or nothing, you have no right to be in the country whatsoever. They could hold you and call up ICE and tell them and hold you until they come and get you, or they could not. But either way, that's their right to do so. But it's just on the by the same token, it's Trump's right or the federal government's right to deploy ICE into wherever the fuck they want or wherever they need to do these operations to arrest illegal immigrants. That's well within their rights as well.
So don't we? I'm curious what we disagree about them.
In terms of, do we want to narrow the conversation to what's like going on in California right now, like the LA, like the use of the National Guard and stuff? Do we want to narrow it to that?
I mean, I kind of figured that's what you were talking about. We can talk about something.
Okay, no, we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, my whole thesis is that, I mean, if the federal government has, I would say they have an obligation to, but at the very minimum, they have the ability to enforce federal laws in states that are not complying with those laws. I think that, generally speaking, good thing. Yeah. No,
I absolutely agree with you. The president does need to. I mean, that's his fucking job, right? Enforce the law. That's not where our disagreement lies. Whether or not ICE can go into California and arrest people, that's definitely not where our disagreement is at all. No.
So
I'm all on board with that. My disagreement would be on the usage of the National Guard and now actual. I shouldn't say actual active duty military because that's disrespectful to National Guardsmen, because they are real military. National Guardsmen take a lot of heat. But now they're bringing in Marines too now. So, I mean, yeah, the bring in of the military would be where we definitely disagree, because you probably would say that that's a good thing or a necessary thing, right?
I wouldn't say it's necessary. I mean, I don't have a problem with it. Man. Whether or not it's necessary, I mean, that's more of a logistics problem of like what the resources look like on the ground. Generally speaking, if ICE can't do their jobs and they need support in the form of military or National Guard assistance, I'm in favor of them receiving that way.
Okay, so that's what I said. Okay, so this is where our disagreement is. So that's why I said like that is a fundamentally unconstitutional argument, right? The military absolutely has no authorization to conduct law enforcement operations inside the United States. You can't just like bring in a battalion of Marines to round up immigrants.
Wait, but hold on. If the president's, again, broadly speaking, if the executive branch's responsibility is to enforce laws, how do you expect them to do that without like a force to do that with?
ICE is the force.
Yeah, so we're just splitting hairs then at this point. That if ICE does not have enough resources, it follows, and this isn't just like about ICE. This is about any law enforcement agency. If they don't have enough resources to do their job,
Uh-huh.
the responsibility of their supervisors or the people who are in charge of that is to give them more resources, right?
Right. And my contention is that, for one, I should be really clear for chat. I mean, for you and for chat, right? That so far, as of literally right now, as I'm saying this, the military was not brought in, like the National Guard and the Marines were not brought in to conduct ICE operations with ICE. Like they weren't, the reason they're brought it, like, or at least the purported reason for bringing them in had nothing to do with like, oh, we're going to bring in more hands to help us catch all these people. That's not why they're there. But so moving forward, just know that we are speaking hypothetically here, because it sounds like you wouldn't even be against that if that was the reason. If it was like, if ICE were saying, look, we don't have enough people, we need more hands, and they ordered in the National Guard to help come help them out with their operations. It sounds like to me, and like correct me if I'm wrong, that you would not have an issue with that.
Well, I wouldn't have an issue with that. My understanding of what's happening in Los Angeles right now is that ICE, I mean, it wasn't exactly what you just said, but yeah, I mean, ICE had issues in the form of like massive amounts of people protesting, doing their job. So the president and the military and the National Guard.
Yeah, but parts of that are somewhat true, somewhat not true. But prior to the National Guard being called in, it depends on, I guess, how you would define massive. Prior to the National Guard being called in, the protests were relatively small. They weren't like they just weren't massive. After the National Guard got called in, yes, they've ramped up tenfold, 100-fold probably. Like they've ramped way the fuck up since the National Guard came in. But the National Guard wasn't brought in, again, just to clarify, it had nothing to do with helping ICE with their operations. It had to do with protecting these detainment facilities. And that's it. It was just where, there was Trump cited two concerns of the protesters attacking the facilities. And so they brought in the National Guard to protect the facilities. That's separate from the ICE raids. It's a separate issue.
Isn't the detainment facility just where ICE sends people after they catch them?
Yeah.
So I mean, again, we're splitting hairs, but that's protecting.
Yeah, I'm just trying to draw a difference between protecting federal property and helping ICE with the raids, right? Because the helping ICE with the raids, like if you were to have a battalion of Marines going, kicking doors down, grabbing immigrants, that's 100% super duper illegal, right? But having them stand outside of a detention facility to guard it against protesters, that's not. I just want to draw that line of that. Those are two very different things.
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, when I'm talking about these kinds of things, I'm not talking about legality. I'm talking about morality, right? So if it's legal, sorry if I sound like a debate nerd right now, but like if it's legal for me to behead a dog, right? It's morally wrong for me to do that. Yep. Massive problem with you doing that, even though it might be. I'm not sure if that's legal or not, but even though it's legal. So same thing with, like you said, with the Marines, busting down doors and getting illegal immigrants. Like you could be completely right that would be unconstitutional or illegal or whatever. I would just say that morally speaking, there isn't an issue with doing that. So at the end of the day, the legality argument is kind of just it's just kind of semantic, right?
Sure. If you don't want to have the legality argument, I think the morality issue follows pretty close behind. The reason, especially when you consider the reasons why you would not want the military to be involved in domestic operations. There's a really good reason why you absolutely would not want the military being involved in domestic things or in political things. I know we've kind of gotten used to over the last few months of like the Department of Defense being like highly politicized, largely Pete Hegseth's fault. But you don't want that. That's not good to have the military getting involved in domestic issues or political issues. You generally want them to be as neutral as humanly possible. The entire Department of Defense, you'd want them to be as neutral as they can possibly get and stay out of domestic shit.
I mean, I'm kind of confused what you're trying to say right now. That it's.
So I'm saying. Well, you didn't respond to that. You said you essentially in more words. You said that you just because something is illegal, that doesn't mean you care about it at all. So I'm pivoting now. Okay, so you don't care that it would be illegal to have the military come in and help with these operations. Although you said you'd support it, but you support it regardless of its legality. So then I'll move into a more pragmatic reason for why you shouldn't be okay with that. And it's that you don't want the military being involved in domestic stuff, and you do not want them politicized, because then they can be you don't want to end up living in a world where the military just gets called upon to enact the whims of the president with no sort of restrictions on when they can and can't intervene. The reason we have restrictions, there's a good fucking reason why you should have a restriction on when the military can come in and when they cannot.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, the military still isn't, regardless of if they're actually physically seen on the ground right now, the military still, at the end of the day, is who's in charge, right? Like, there could be, I mean, just because, for example, if Joe Biden or Kamala Harris doesn't want to employ the National Guard or employ the military in any way, the military is still in charge, right? Like, at the end of the day, the ability for the state to charge taxes or to arrest people or do whatever, at the end of the day, is from the fact that they have a monopoly on force, right?
Yeah, the government has a monopoly on force, kind of. I mean, that's what we have a Second Amendment for, right? So yeah,
Yeah,
I take your point, but I wouldn't pin that down to the military, and mostly because I don't know how much compliance. Like if it ever were the case that, let's just say, Trump said, hey, I'm ordering, if he put out a fucking presidential memorandum right now saying that I'm ordering all active duty service members within the United States to start rounding up liberals, right? Anyone, people that aren't MAGA. You're not going to get a whole lot of compliance out of that order. If anything, you're just going to end up, you're either going to get like pretty much across the board ignorance of that order, or you're going to end up having like a mini civil war on military bases of like half the people being like, no, fuck no. And then the other half being like, yeah, we're going to do this. And it's just a whole mess. So like, yeah, whilst the military exists and they can exert a lot of force, like we have restrictions. The most active duty people are well aware of those restrictions and won't go too far out of bounds for stuff like that.
Yeah, so again, it sounds like we agree more than we disagree. I mean, the military should. I guess I'm just kind of confused where.
I think our disagreement here is I believe very firmly that there's a very good reason why the military stays out of domestic and political stuff, and you seem to think that it's okay in certain circumstances. I'm saying it's okay in no circumstances. But not no circumstances. If there was like a literal fucking civil war type rebellion going on, then of course, what choice do you have at that? Like you have to bring in the military. You don't have a choice anymore. But when it's protests in LA, no. I think we've gone a little too far there.
Well, yeah, but at the end of the day, if there's, yeah, I don't know. I mean, if there's protests in LA and there's some level of civil disturbance going on, and for one reason or another, the LA law enforcement, like the domestic LA law enforcement, doesn't want to take care of it, I don't have a moral problem with the federal government stepping in where they're not taking care of things. Right?
In that circumstance, you actually might be onto something. You might actually have a super valid point if that were the case. If it were the case, I'll paint you a picture here. If it were the case that ICE was doing like immigration raids, like arresting, rounding up immigrants and stuff, and these protests started happening, and maybe they were attacking, the protesters maybe got a little rowdy and started attacking detention facilities, and the LAPD and all the surrounding sheriff's offices were just like, hey, not our problem, fuckers, and they just weren't doing anything. Then actually, you're probably entirely on point in saying like, okay, what choice do we have? We have to call in the National Guard. There's no options here. But that's not what happened. In fact, the LAPD was handling it, and they were containing the protests pretty well. Even the Gavin Newsom himself and the head of the LAPD both said like, we've got this. We're good. We got it under control. And then Trump called in the National Guard anyway, and then shit got much worse.
Well, taking it back to what we were talking about before, like, I mean, generally speaking, in California, especially in Los Angeles County, the government, generally speaking, treats illegal immigration and illegal people living within California, living in Los Angeles County, it treats that as what you just said, as like, no big deal, we got it, like it's whatever, right? And my point is that it's not whatever, it's not okay. It's a massive national security issue to have millions and millions of people living here undocumented without really any way of keeping track of them. And so if Los Angeles County in California, and again, I'm not going to go into the specifics of the administration in California, but if they're going to say that the illegal immigration problem isn't a problem and it's not a big deal, and that it's this radical authoritarian thing for ICE to go in and arrest loads of people who are here illegally, they're full of crap in saying that it's not a big deal. Like it is a big deal. And at the end of the day, if the federal government needs to step in order for California to stop doing that, that's a good thing.
Yeah, but you're fundamentally talking about a completely different thing. It's not like the police in LA or the police in California. It's not their job to do immigration enforcement. It's ICE's job to do immigration enforcement. They were doing their immigration enforcement. What you'd be asking for, the police in LA or the police in California to be doing is protecting those ICE officers if they started getting attacked, which they were doing. There was protests. They weren't even really getting attacked. There, people were just protesting, and the LAPD showed up and they had the protests under control. You're asking for like the LAPD. It seems like what you're asking for is like for LAPD to like join in on immigration raids, but that's not their job. That's ICE's job.
Yeah, and again, from a moral standpoint, and I think a large portion of the people who voted for Trump would say this was like mother voted for him, that it shouldn't be an option for local police departments to harbor illegals, like period. And that means that and again, in Los Angeles, for example, if you're an illegal immigrant and you get caught doing something that has nothing to do with you being an illegal immigrant, that still should be reported to ICE because that's a national security issue.
I could be wrong about this. I'm pretty sure they still make the report to ICE. They just don't hold the people until ICE gets there to get them. So they'll like say like, hey, we arrested this guy. He was undocumented. Just letting you know. And then if ICE, shows up, like, all right, where is he? They're like, we let him go. We don't hold them for you to wait for you to get here. But again, like, and look, if this is your position, we can have the argument about, the right and wrongs of this thing. But I would like the concession up front that at least you realize that that's not an unconstitutional argument, although what you're asking for would be unconstitutional, but you're making like an argument against the current United States Constitution. You're saying like, I don't like the way the current U.S. Constitution functions, and I want to change it or get rid of it or whatever. Because that you'd have to, in order for what you're saying, to require state police or local police to hold immigrants for ICE to come get them. The principles of federalism would have to go out the window. You'd have to say, all right, no more states' rights, at least in terms of this.
So what specific part of the Constitution, because I'm going to pull up the Constitution right now because I'm not a constitutional expert by any means, but what specific part of the Constitution would that violate?
Well, for one, you can't force a state to. Let me ask you this: what state would be a good example? Colorado. We'll use Colorado. I think because they were like maybe the first. I think they were the first ones to do it. So when Colorado legalized,
if you're talking about marijuana, it was Washington.
Yeah. Washington. Okay, so Washington legalized marijuana, right? But it was still federally illegal. How can they do that? How can you make something legal in a state?
They broke the law to do that, and they shouldn't have been able to do that. The federal government should have stopped them from doing that. And if they really wanted to, if people in this country really wanted to make marijuana legal, they shouldn't have just jerry-rigged state laws to do it. They should have like repealed it being a Schedule I drug according to the federal.
Okay. So yeah. Okay. So then can you do the admission that I was asking for? You just said like, so yeah, the principles of federalism you don't like, the idea that a state can have their own laws that they enforce and the federal government has their own law. Like you don't like that. You think all states should be required to comport with federal law.
Yeah, that's the point of having a federal government, dude. Yeah.
Well, ask the framers of the Constitution and the founders of the country. They would disagree with you.
Well, yeah, and we had a war about it, and after the war, we decided that generally speaking, having a strong federal government's a good idea. So that, like marijuana is a great example. Like the idea that you can, be in Washington and smoke as much marijuana as you want to, and it's fine, and then go across the border to Idaho and get sent to jail for it. That's ridiculous, right? Like we shouldn't have that much discrepancy between states as far as like enforcing laws go. Marijuana is a good example. Abortion is a good example. Immigration is a great example. Like there's plenty of reasons why states shouldn't have the level of discrepancy they do between states as far as, because at the end of the day, these are national issues. Like marijuana legality and abortion and immigration enforcement, these aren't state issues. These are national issues. And at the end of the day, if someone doesn't like their state's, immigration or abortion or marijuana legislation or whatever, they shouldn't be able to just like hop across the river and like be in a different state and just completely evade it. That's from a national point of view, which is when you vote on president, you're voting on the national leader. That's not acceptable, right?
Yeah, when you vote for president, you're voting for the national leader. But just like when you vote for your governor, you're voting for your state's leader. States have different laws than the federal government does.
Yeah, but a state in like I'll go back to the marijuana example. A state legalizing marijuana and protecting businesses, selling marijuana to people, that's federally illegal. And at the end of the day, the federal government has a right, and I would say an obligation, to stop that from happening, or to change federal law so that they're not breaking the law doing that. Like you can't have laws and then make it like some moral quandary to enforce them. Like that completely spits in the face of the point of having laws.
Okay. I think I've said it a few times now. Like this can be, like this is an okay opinion for us to like fight it out on. I would just like want to go forward with on the admission that yeah, you're anti-federalists. That's fine. So one blanket set of laws. Federal law is the only law. We have one blanket set, and every state follows them, right?
Well, no, you can have differences. What I'm saying is that if the federal government explicitly says, if the federal government explicitly says that something's illegal, such as like a Schedule I drug, or such as being in the country illegally, the states shouldn't be able to just say yeah, but no, and then just do their own thing. There's plenty of things where states have a legal like space to disagree with each other. And this state can have this tax policy, and this state can have this tax policy, and that's how we are with abortion right now, which I don't agree with. But at the end of the day,
Wait, why don't you agree with abortion? Abortion fits perfectly into the framework that you just laid out. There's no federal laws regarding like there's no federal abortion ban, so each state can decide what they want their laws to be. That's like perfect. No, that's exactly what you said. Why you shouldn't have an issue with that?
Yeah, no, and that the federal government should have a law against it. But no, what I'm saying that states, I agree with you that legally speaking, states do have a right to have their own abortion laws. What I'm saying is that is not the situation with immigration. So the same, like just like California can have a different, abortion policy than like Wyoming or something. I agree that they're allowed to do that. I'm not disagreeing with you about that. Morally, they shouldn't be able to. But that's not the conversation. When it comes to immigration, whether you're in Wyoming or in Hawaii or Guam or California, it doesn't matter. If you are not allowed to be here legally, you're not allowed to be here legally. The fact that you're in California or you're in like Colorado or something doesn't change that.
Okay. So let me narrow or let me rephrase your argument, and then we'll go from there. So, what sounds like the governance that you would like would be kind of like a very similar to like the military method, right? So with the military, you have a set of overarching guidelines, right? But then your command, the particular place you're at, like I was in the Navy, right? So we have like an overarching big Navy wide rule set. But then your particular command can narrow them even further, but they can't expand them. They can't make stuff that's against the rules now, not against the rules. But they can make stuff that wasn't against the rule or that isn't against the big rule set. They can make that against the smaller rule set, right? So that sounds more like what you're arguing for.
Well, and that's, as I understand it, generally speaking, that's how states are supposed to work. And like we've had plenty of disagreements with this over time, and that's why, like generally speaking, from the inception of America in the late 1700s up until now, the federal government's gotten significantly stronger, and states' rights have gotten significantly weaker. And that's happened for a reason, because it's not healthy for in one country to have massive discrepancies between states having different policies and stuff. Like again, you can have like small disagreements, and that's the point of having states. But when it comes to things like immigration, for example, it doesn't help anyone to have like California harboring millions of illegals against federal law. Like that doesn't help anyone.
So then what do you think the punishment should be? Let's say there's a law in the books. We'll even get off of like the contemptuous ones, right? Let's say like let's say something much more innocuous. Let's just say there's some random federal law in the books that says, it's something, I don't know, says you can't fucking write, you can no longer write with a number 2 pencil. And then you have say fucking Tennessee that's just like, yeah, we don't give a fuck about that law. Write with a number 2 pencil if you want. Who cares? What should be the punishment for a state to come out, like a state or maybe even like a local municipality just saying like, yeah, we don't care about that, dude. We're not going to punish for that, or we're not going to charge for that. That's stupid.
Theoretically, if the federal government was to outlaw number 2 pencils, I would be in support of whatever body it takes necessary, be it, I don't know what the ICE equivalent of number 2. I mean, this is a silly example, so it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I would be in support of the federal government going into Tennessee and removing every number 2 pencil. The whole point, though, if I can finish, is that That would never happen because that's silly. Because unlike illegal immigration, number two pencils are not a contentious issue. So
Yeah, well, that's
what
why
I
it's a hypothetical. But yeah, sure, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, but what I'm saying is that ideally in that situation, they would realize that it's silly to go into Tennessee and like at gunpoint take people's number two pencils away. And ideally, then that would go up to the federal level, and then be it the Supreme Court or the legislature or whatever would say, "Yeah, this is silly. We're not going to start a fucking war with Tennessee over this. We'll make number two pencils legal." Right? That's how it works. The thing with immigration is that immigration is a more serious issue. So the federal government does have like they would be willing to like go to bat over this issue in the form of like sending in the National Guard or something like that, which is
Sure.
yeah. At the end of the day, the federal government's position on immigration should trump California's or any other
Okay.
subdivision.
Yeah,
You know,
I maybe I shouldn't have used such a innocuous hypothetical because you didn't get to the point I was trying to get to. So let's just use the fucking real thing. All right, immigrant. What do you think should happen to? Let's say there's a fucking a district attorney in some fuck ass county in the middle of I don't know, middle America. There's some district attorney that's like, well, I wouldn't really be the DA. Let's say there's some sheriff. There's a sheriff in some random county in the middle of Ohio, say, and he says, if we arrest you, um, if we arrest you and find out you're undocumented, we're gonna, we'll charge you, we'll do whatever we got to do in terms of like the reason we arrested you. We'll throw you in jail or we'll fucking, give you a ticket or whatever. But in terms of the undocumented part, like we're not gonna call ICE and have them come get you. Like what should happen to that guy? What should the federal government do about him, that sheriff?
if I'm trying to think, is impeding. I was trying to think of the best. If he's violating,
You're looking for. I think you're looking for obstruction.
Well, I think yeah, but if there was, I think there should be a federal law saying that if you're a local law enforcement entity or whatever, and you discover that someone's illegal, that you should either you should work with the federal government as quickly as possible to take care of that. If that sheriff, like you said, is not doing that and is going around like, oh, you're illegal, okay, fine, whatever, we're not going to do anything, we're going to not report you to the federal government. They should. I don't think arresting them is necessary. I think they should be removed from that position so they're not able to instruct anymore.
Well, sheriff's an elected position, right? So like the people of that town or county, the people of that county elected him. The federal government can't step in, and again, this is where we get back to a fundamental problem with your state system of governance that you seem to want. What do you do in that? It's a fucking elected official. What are you gonna do?
Yeah, the federal government can remove them. We did that after the Civil War.
You can arrest them. Best case.
Southern states would elect governors that we didn't like, and we just remove them. Which, like, I understand, like, that's saying that out loud, like, that sounds kind of extreme. But if a state, and again, going back to the immigration example, if a state is completely willing to just ignore federal law, then yeah, federal law needs to be.
Okay.
That needs to
We've looped back around to where I always was trying to get to, of the idea of. So now, we live in a world under your system here. We live in a world in which the president gets to determine who gets elected and who doesn't in wherever the fuck he feels like. If by just saying you're not upholding federal law, we're going to remove you from office.
Yeah, if you're breaking federal law, you should be stopped from doing that. Correct.
Yeah, this is the exact reason that we have a system of federalism. This is why we have states. If in your world, there's no reason to have states. There is no Virginia, there is no Ohio, there is no California. It's just one state, just the United States. But then the name doesn't even make sense anymore, right? We're no longer the United States. We're just the one state.
What's the point of having a federal law if like subdivisions of the federal government going to say, "No, we're not going to do that," and then the federal government can't step in?
The federal law still applies. The federal government. The problem, the thing that you're missing, I think, is that the federal government can still step in and enforce the FBI. Like, let's say, like, the good example is like the marijuana stuff, right? In a state in which there can be a state like Washington where you can walk up to a fucking Washington state police officer and smoke a joint right in front of him, and he's not gonna. You're not getting arrested, right? But you walk up to an FBI agent in that same state, and you're liable to be arrested. All right, not to say that they always will. They probably just don't care. But you could totally be arrested. So the federal government can absolutely 100% come in and enforce federal law. It's still federal law, and they're federal law enforcement, right? They can. It's just in this country, we have a system in which the federal government cannot force the state government to do anything, really. If a state police officer says, like, yeah, I don't care, then the federal government, fuck you, federal government. Like, that's not your purview. But the FBI can still come in and do whatever they want to do, whatever they need to do.
So hypothetically, I'm going to try to make this as realistic as possible. Let's say Alabama, right?
Yep.
If Alabama decided to reinstate like legal segregation, right, and you had black water fountains, white water fountains, black schools, white schools, etc., would you think it would be unreasonable for the federal government to like step in and stop that?
No, that's exactly what would happen.
I'm sorry?
No, and that's exactly what would happen.
Okay.
Well, let's see if you can get to the why.
Well, no, I'm just
what I laid out and what you're currently laying out are worlds apart, and there's one very poignant reason why they're worlds apart.
Yeah, go ahead and tell me why. I'm at a loss.
The example that I gave you is constitutional. Your example is unconstitutional.
What? I think you lost me somewhere. So I would agree that under the current constitution, it's illegal to discriminate like legally on the basis of race, right?
Yep.
What's your example? You were saying that, like, what's the inconsistency you're pointing to?
So in my example, with say, I'll continue
You're
with
talking about the number 2 pencil thing?
No, I'm just gonna keep using the marijuana example, right? So in that, there's no constitutional violation at play there. No one's violating the Constitution. If anything, you're falling squarely within the Constitution. You're falling straight. You're fairly square within 10th Amendment grounds there. Versus, in your example, you're falling very far out of 14th Amendment range. You're you'd very clearly be in violation of the 14th Amendment. And so, yes, for one, the courts would put a stop to that. They already have. I mean, so with precedent in terms of school segregation or whatever, right? But yeah, it would be the purview of the federal government. If there's a state violating Constitution, or if there's a state that is violating people's constitutional rights, it is the purview of the federal government to put a stop to that. Versus, in my example, just people like, state police ignoring federal marijuana laws. There's no constitutional violation in play there. So the federal government has no purview to step in and do anything about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we can agree to disagree then.
Well, I mean, you'd have to, like, the disagreement would be on how the country should work, not how it does work. Because what I just laid out to you is how it does work. We'd be disagreeing on how it should work, right?
Yeah, I would say that the federal government's power doesn't end at the Constitution, I would say, necessarily.
No, but this again, this is the thing I keep trying to point out. It doesn't. And I'm not saying it should. Again, the federal government can go into a state. It's not like it's not like the fucking state borders are like some force field where the federal government can't enter. Like, that wouldn't even make sense. There's FBI offices everywhere. I think there's an FBI office not a couple miles, but like within like 20, 30 miles from my house, right? The FBI's everywhere, right? The federal government can continue to enforce federal law in a state where, again, I use the marijuana example. Like, if you're in Washington and you go fucking smoke a joint in front of an FBI agent, like, you're liable to be arrested. They can arrest you and charge you with, whatever the federal statute is for possession of marijuana. They can totally do that. So there's nothing saying like just because the state government doesn't want to deal with a certain federal law that the federal law is just like gone now and it doesn't exist in that state. The federal government can still enforce it. The federal government just can't force the state to do anything. That forcing the state to act is the thing that can't happen. But coming in and doing it yourself, you can come in and do it yourself. You want to fucking send the FBI in? Do it. Nobody cares. You can do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we broadly are kind of on the same page then. Insofar as, I think, just to keep on with the marijuana example, I wouldn't have a problem with the federal government going into states where marijuana is legal, which unfortunately is like most of this point, and stopping them from facilitating people buying drugs.
Yeah, they can do that, yeah.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, I think it's more of a, I don't know if you want to say a cultural thing where people who aren't people who don't support marijuana being legal, by and large, wouldn't support the federal government like having these wide-ranging like raids on like dispensaries and stuff like that. Just because I think it's more of a cultural thing than anything that Americans just don't like seeing stuff like that. Um, but that being said, and I think immigration, if anything, is going to be I guess, kind of the straw that breaks the camel's back in this regard. That like at the end of the day, if the federal government is going to have laws, it's worth upholding those laws. Otherwise, having laws doesn't really mean anything. It's just nothing at that point. If a law isn't enforced, it's not really a law, right?
Yeah, but don't you see how backwards that thinking is? You're
How so?
like that argument is based on the entire. Which, by the way, the argument that you just said, like, what's the point of even having laws if we don't follow? I totally agree with you. Absolutely, I think in that we would be in 100% agreement. The problem is it contradicts your earlier argument of the method, the way in which Trump federalized the National Guard and sent them in, the method by which he did it. Now, this is not to say that he can't do it. He could. There's legal avenues to where Trump could send in the National Guard and it would be 100% fine. But the method that he chose was illegal. And so if you want to have an argument of like what's the fucking point of having laws if we're just going to break them, right? I agree. We should enforce them. But that applies to the government as much as it applies to the citizens. If the government is going to pass laws to limit its own power, it should follow those laws through and through, just like citizenship. Like there's no point in having a murder law if you're just going to run around shooting people, right? Of course, like what's the point? Or sorry, if we're just going to tolerate that, right? If we're just going to tolerate like me running around shooting people, like there's no point in even having murder statutes anymore. Fucking throw them out. Same thing for when the government, Congress passing laws to limit its own power. If you're going to pass a law to limit your own power, follow the fucking law you just passed, and that's all I'm arguing for here. Trump could have invoked the Insurrection Act. Technically, he could have, and sent in the National Guard completely legally to California, but he chose not to. He chose to do it through not legal methods, and that's my complaint.
Okay, no, that's valid. I'll leave it at that because I got some other stuff I need to do. But yeah, I mean, you've been reasonable enough. I mean, we disagree where we disagree, but I appreciate the. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think, and again, I think I'm speaking for most Americans when I say this, that I think morality, generally speaking, comes before legality for most people. And I think
Yeah.
one example is probably the best example of that. But people will agree that it's federally illegal to use and buy, I'm not sure about using, but to buy and sell marijuana. Like it's illegal federally. But that being said, the page that the country's on morally is way different than that. So people put up with what states are doing with marijuana because that aligns with their morality, even though it doesn't align with federal laws. And I guess that's my position on just most things in general. Which again, I'll be the first to admit that my position on marijuana isn't what most of the country's position is, and that's fine. But like generally speaking, like laws are downstream from morality, and at the end of the day, morality is kind of like what kind of reigns supreme as far as pretty much.
I mean, I agree with you. The problem is, I think that framing and that logic gets applied in one direction and not the other. Where I do agree that like our laws are made or they're derived from some sense of morality. Even when Congress passes a law, the reason they're doing it is because if they're making something illegal, it's because that they think that thing that they're making illegal is immoral, generally speaking, or just bad for society. So they're going to make it illegal so people don't do it or it doesn't happen as much, whatever. Like, so I agree with you from the laws are downstream from our morals, but that analysis needs to be applied both ways. The laws that we have on the books that limit the power of the federal government, we derived those from morality and from our history, from the idea that we had to fight a war to get out from under the thumb of a king, and we don't want to have to do that a second time. Third time, I guess. We already had a civil war once. We don't want to run it back. We don't want to do another war to fight for to get out from under whatever regime we feel like we need to fight to get out from under. And so we pass laws to limit the power of the federal government so we don't have to run that back. And so when people come along like you and they say, actually, I know we passed those laws, but I don't care if he breaks those laws as long as he's enforcing these other ones. This is a hypocritical analysis.
No, it isn't hypocritical. And the reason it isn't hypocritical is because I'm not some sort of like legal supremacist. Like it's not that I think the reason that it's okay for Trump to break this law is so he's enforcing this other law. The reason I think it's okay for Trump to break this, that, and the third law is because I think it's morally okay for him to do that. It's not because I think that like federal immigration law is like somehow superior to like National Guard. I'm not going to, National Guard enforce like deployment procedures or something like it. That's not it. The reason is that it's at the end of the day, if it's morally okay to break a law, then I'm okay with you breaking a law. If it's morally okay, right?
Okay. Would you say that? Would you say that if a law is on the books and you think it's morally okay to break it and you break it, how would you feel about what would your opinion on like the punishment for that breaking of the law? Like in terms of like, do you accept that if you break a law because you deem it to be or you deem the law itself to be immoral, or the action that is illegal is a moral act, so you should be you're like, I'm going to break this because the thing I'm doing is fundamentally moral, it's still a law that you're breaking, and so you should take the punishment on the chin if it ever comes? Or what's your opinion there?
No, you should. If you're breaking, if a law is immoral and you break that law as some sort of moral action, it is not moral for the police to come in and like punish you for that. I agree that the police have a job to do, and I agree that there's like a legal framework behind that. But what I'm saying is that the morality is more important than any of that. So a police do not have a right to enforce immoral laws.
Okay. Don't you? So then you would say, if I take your thinking all the way to its fundamental conclusion, doesn't this just end with us just like every maybe a couple hundred years just having another civil war over and over and over and over, civil wars forever? Because at some point, the people with my line of thinking of protecting laws and protecting people's rights is going to clash with yours of anything's okay as long as I think the end result is moral, and we just
It's
have
not
to.
anything's okay. It's anything's okay as long as it's moral, which
Yeah,
is like
yeah,
morality.
that's what I'm saying. As long as the end result is more, like for instance, like I don't think I like you're seem to be it seems to be the case that what you want is for people that are here illegally, undocumented immigrants, to all be deported, right? I don't know, barring like some like cruel and unusual punishment / like torture type shit. I don't know what I could I don't know what ICE could do that would be condemnable to you.
You cut out for a second. I'm sorry. You said barring some cruel and unusual.
Yeah, but I was gonna say barring some cruel and unusual punishment type shit. I'm not sure what ICE could do in furtherance of that end goal that would be like condemnable to you, to where you'd be like, okay, look, you've gone too far in order to achieve this end goal that I want.
What are you? What are you trying to say? I'm confused.
So you think the moral thing to do is to deport all undocumented immigrants, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm saying is there a line that ICE could cross in order to achieve that goal, in order to achieve the goal of deporting all undocumented immigrants? Is there a line that they could cross to where you would say, hey, you've gone too far in an attempt to make this happen?
Yeah, of course.
And like, can you give me like one example of something that you would say, like, if they did it, you'd be like, nope, too far, stop?
If ICE kills 2 million Americans in order to deport 2 million illegals, I would say that that's not okay.
Is there any line that they could cross in direct relation to the immigrants themselves? So let's say no American citizen ever gets touched by ICE. Like no harm comes to any American citizen. Only harm comes to the immigrants. Is there any line in there that you would say is too far?
No, that sounds pretty based, honestly.
Okay. So you understand that this logic, your line of logic of do whatever you have to do to them to get them out, versus the like more left of center, or probably even more center. That's like a very far, like what you just laid out is like a very far right opinion.
Yeah.
Eventually there has to come a time where we just have to have a civil war to get one of our sides has to completely die.
Where you get, where did you get a civil war from that? I'm confused.
Because if that's what you want, if you think it's okay to do anything as long as you view it as moral, so you just laid out what you would view as moral. Doing anything you have to do to immigrants in order to get them out. You do anything to them.
Yeah.
Okay. If it were the case that ICE was doing horrible, torturous, just inhumane, disgusting shit to immigrants in furtherance of getting them out, and the left and the center of the country is like absolutely not, like what you're saying, the LA riots, for example. If that becomes a countrywide thing,
Yeah.
how do we sort that problem out amongst ourselves? We fight it out.
Yeah, well, and so no, I agree that we do have to fight it out. The disagreement is that we don't have to fight it out via a civil war.
Mm.
The whole point of having a country, right? The whole point of having any sort of collection of people that's doing something is that there's a moral backbone behind it. There's an idea of this is who we are, this is what we're doing, this is what we're about, this is what's right, this is what's wrong.
Yep.
That's the whole point of having any sort of political entity, right?
Yeah, I agree.
So what I'm saying is that if at the end of the day, if the country is so ridiculously divided that we can't agree on what is right and what is wrong, it doesn't have to be violent. It doesn't have to be like someone doesn't have to die because of it. But yeah, no, we do have to like fight that out insofar as we have to figure out what's right and what's wrong.
We do have to fight that out, and we do fight that out, and then that's how we codify laws. And your argument is you can break those laws as long as the end result is something you think is moral. I'm saying we've already had this. We've already decided what human rights look like in this country. We've already decided what what rights for certain groups of people looks like in this country. We have those laws in the books, and you're like, well, we can break them because I want them gone. If that's the case, if we've already had the discussion, if we've already had that fight, and that's settled, and you're like, fuck those laws. I don't see a next option other than like, and especially if those actions, and I did lay out like a pretty ridiculous hypothetical. Like I don't necessarily know if I see a world in which ICE is just like torturing people for fun or something. Yeah. Like I don't see that. I don't necessarily see that. I mean, maybe it's not off the table, but that's not seemingly completely happening yet. But if it was, I don't see a second option. I think we just fight it out, and I don't mean verbally.
No, I don't think that's. I don't. And here's the thing about war is that Americans, and do you have any like military experience? Just out of curiosity.
Yes, I was in the military 6 years.
Okay, were you deployed?
Once.
Okay, so war sucks. Like war is really bad, and at the end of the day, anyone who has any experience of war whatsoever wants to avoid it. So at the end of the day, what we're talking about, where there's two different entities in the country, radically different.
I fundamentally disagree with you.
On what?
There are things that are worth, like everyone wants to avoid war, right? Everyone like no one's like fucking begging. Well, I mean, there's some people. There's a couple people I've seen that are a little bit. I don't know what adjective to use here. There's some people that want it. But everyone agrees that there are things that are worth fighting for, that are worth it. And I think what you've laid out here, if it were if the hypothetical that I gave you and you said you were okay with was literally actually fucking happening, I'll do it. I'll go right now.
If ICE was rounding up
no. If their angle was like we're just going to deport all the everyone that's here undocumented, that to me I would say that's wrong and I would fight against that. But I'm not fucking going to war over it. But if it was like we're like executing them because we need them gone by any means necessary, and gone in this case just means like not in our country anymore, and if that means dead, that means dead. Like if that was what was happening, I'd be like, okay, let's go right now. War, let's do it.
Yeah, I think we generally speaking agree, and that's why and like if I guess we are kind of in the range of hypotheticals here, that if the left entity in America and the right entity in America had such a fundamental disagreement on what's right and what's wrong, my hypothesis is that they would balkanize before they would just. I guess balkanize is the wrong word because balkanize refers to the Balkan Wars, but like they would separate before they would just kill each other. At the end of the day, right? Like they would reach some sort of agreement where the first option isn't just everyone dies, right?
Not everyone, just half.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
No, if you're talking about like, all right, look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to split the country in half, and you fuckers are going to go live over there, and we're going to live over here, and you govern your side the way you want, and we'll go. If that's what you're talking about, then like maybe.
That would happen before a civil war.
But I mean, that's kind of what we tried to do in the Civil War, and we fought a civil war instead. The secessionist movement was like, hey, you know what? Fuck it. You guys do what you want to do over there, and we're going to go over here and do what we want to do. And the answer was, no, we're actually not going to do that. We're going to fight a war, and whoever wins can decide. So I think you're actually wrong, and I do think it would just be a war.
Yeah, I mean, the Civil War, you could be right. I mean, I'm not necessarily opinion on that, but like, the Civil War at the end of the day was a coalition of states versus another coalition of states, right? The kind
I
of
mean,
conflict.
how else would you do this, right? It's just going to be red states, blue states again, right?
No, I don't think so. California has the biggest conservative population in America. So if something like this did happen, California wouldn't fight it as California. It would be, by and large, it would be the liberal areas of California versus the conservative areas of California. It wouldn't be California in no way, shape, or form. If there was some sort of like kinetic conflict in America, California would not be on the liberal side of that by any means as California. Maybe like the southern parts of California, like Los Angeles County, absolutely, but no, Northern California would not in a million years take up arms against like Idaho and like Wyoming and like Montana. Not in a million years.
Maybe I don't know how it would play out. All I'm saying is if our fundamental like moral disagreements, because I do agree with you entirely that we write our laws we write our laws to comport with our morality. Generally speaking, that's what we do. Or if sometimes like you get exceptions to that when it's just like such a large societal interest of like maybe we do think this would be okay, but if we allow it, society's going to collapse on itself. Um, so yeah, we generally write our laws to mimic our morality, and but yeah, what do we do if we've done that process and we've gone through that process and we've put the laws on the books and then one side's like actually fuck all these laws because we just want to do this over here instead.
I wait. What do you? I think I'm missing something. What are you saying?
I'm saying I agree with you on the fundamental principles that laws are downstream from morality,
Yeah.
but once we've written a law and it's codified, your argument is that like the law doesn't actually matter. It's just what our morality is in that moment. And we have two political parties in this country with two very different sets of morality. So if writing the law is not good enough anymore, if you're saying we can now ignore laws if they don't comport with our morality, that's what we can do now. What do we do then? Like if we've written a law to kind of regulate these things of like, okay, like this is what we believe as a country, and so we're gonna put a law in place, and this is how we're gonna behave in compliance with this law. And then you have another political party that comes in and wins an election, and they're just like, yeah, fuck this law, we're not following that anymore. What's the point? Like, what's the point of any of it anymore at that point, right? It's all fucking useless.
So the point of it is, and again, we can. I'll bring this back actually to your hypothetical with Tennessee and number two pencils, right? The whole point is that when it becomes evident that Tennessee is doing one thing, the federal government's doing another thing, and like that tension isn't okay, right? That something has to change. Which, in the case of the federal government invading Tennessee to take their number two pencils, that's absolutely what happened. There would be a diplomatic solution before Tennessee and the federal that wouldn't happen. And my whole point is that what you're seeing right now with like immigration and with the differences in morality between left and right or whatever, like at the end of the day, that is going to be resolved one way or another. And most rational people would not do that via like warfare, right?
Kind of.
Yeah. So like my whole point is that like morally speaking, at the end of the day, if we can't reconcile with each other, it's not. It probably. I don't even know how we got to this tangent, to be honest with you. But
well, I'm just saying though, my preferred system of governance is that we have where I think I opened this very conversation with it, saying that we are a nation of laws. That's what we're always supposed to be. We're not a nation of men. Donald Trump doesn't determine what the law is. The law determines what the law is. The laws that have been passed by Congress and signed by the current president or former presidents or whoever. We pass laws to determine how we behave. And it seems to be that you're in favor of just saying, actually, Trump, what he wants to do and his morality aligns pretty well with mine. So if he thinks that there's a law he needs to ignore to accomplish his goals, that's okay. And I'm saying that can't be the case because now that's our excuse now for everything. Our excuse, every president, every governmental official, their excuse always just is now going to become, well, this doesn't align with my morality.
Honestly, I more or less agree with you, and I'll just put this pivot that if Trump does something that I disagree with and that a large portion of people disagree with, and it gets to a point where enforcing that unpopular law will be so like cumbersome, for lack of a better word, that it's not worth it, which is like, again, with the number two pencil thing, that's what would happen, right? If the federal government wants to do something that's so ridiculously unpopular, legal or illegal, they're not going to do it because at the end of the day, you need public
Well, that's
support.
that's just politics. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's politics. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about when we have shit that's already on the like in my own. I'll drop back to my own hypothetical, the number 2 pencil thing, right? Stupid ass example, but it was mine.
Well, it isn't because it's actually it's illustrative.
I mean, it's poignant. Yeah, it illustrates the point for sure. Yeah, if it were the case, like the federal government's not gonna, but you understand that we give different weight to different things. Like I think we've already made it a point to say this is kind of goofy because it's such a tiny little itty bitty baby thing. Yeah, the federal government under no circumstances they would put zero effort into. If some state was like, we're not following this law, the federal government would be like, fine, we don't care. Like it's tiny, who cares? But when it comes to bigger things, that doesn't always work. If it's a bigger thing, it's a bigger thing. For instance, I think there was the big standoff between Biden and Greg Abbott, right? During at some point in Biden's presidency, because immigration enforcement is a federal. It's in the purview of the federal government, and there was a point in time where Abbott started blocking federal agents from going to the southern border, and there was a big standoff there for a while. It looked like, from my point of view, I didn't necessarily want this to be the end result, but for a second there, I thought FBI was going to end up having to come in and arrest the fucking governor of Texas. He eventually backed down, but like there's certain things that the federal government does, they're going to have to force the issue. And my point is that the whole point that I'm trying to make overall and try to get you to come to reason on is that whilst you may like it now, you might be like, yeah, actually, there's these laws that are in place that restrict the government's powers, and they're literally there to prevent the government from becoming too dictatorial. Because again, we fucking fought one revolutionary war, nobody really wants to do a second. So we have these laws in place that limit the power of the government so that they don't get the government doesn't get too powerful. And while right now you might be saying, well, what Trump is trying to do is morally good. I think it's a good thing. So I'm okay with him violating those laws that are there to restrict his power. I'm okay with him going beyond the scope of his authority to accomplish this goal that I think is good. All I want to drive home is that whilst you might be on the side right now that's getting your way, you won't always be. There's going to be a fucking Democrat that comes into office at some point, and there's going to be another Democratic president. And if you would fucking flip your shit if they did the same thing. And I know you're going to say, well, like, yeah, it's because I agree with Trump's, I agree with the morality of Trump's actions, and I wouldn't in that case. It all boils back down to morality. But the reason we don't govern that way, the reason we don't just go, actually, the law is whatever the current president's morality says should be the law. That's what the law is at any given time, whatever the current president says. The reason we don't do that is we don't have to keep having these flip flops of like half the country kicking and screaming during one presidency and then the other half doing the same. We just put regulations in place and say, like, look, this is what you're allowed to do. This is what you're not allowed to do. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can do this. You can do that. We put those in place. And as long as everyone stays within the guidelines, you might not be thrilled with the speed at which people are getting deported. Because again, I think we've already covered this. You said you want all undocumented immigrants gone. You might not be thrilled at the speed that it's happening, but it can still be done legally. And that way, we don't end up in this really bad fucking civil war territory of like, we don't have laws in this country anymore. America is no longer a nation of laws. It's a nation of the president is king. And then I wouldn't, it kind of would, I think we'd probably call it a civil war, but it almost harkens back to the Revolutionary War of like, we have to do this again, God damn it, because our president's not following any of the laws.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think, I'm trying to speak from a place we can both agree on. If we want to have a cohesive country, we need to agree on what's right and what's wrong. And I think and I'm not floating a solution to this because I don't have one. At the end of the day, the conundrum that we're both talking about is because we don't, as Americans, know what's right and what's wrong. We don't know if it's okay. That's the problem that we have. And at the end of the day, one way or another, that needs to change. And like I'm not floating a solution to it because I don't have one. But if you live in a county where you fundamentally I don't know why I said county, but if you live in a place where you fundamentally disagree morally on what's happening, and you look around and say what the state is doing here is morally wrong, you have a moral obligation to like combat that in some way, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, what I'm doing. Like,
Yeah,
these actions are morally wrong. Yeah.
yeah, yes. I mean, I think we agree on that. Yeah,
I mean, we agree on you should fight for what you believe is morally correct, but we don't agree at all on what the solution is. Again, my solution is if you think that someone's morally wrong and someone else is morally right, or like I guess it doesn't make sense with individuals more so like if I think that my side is morally correct and your side is morally incorrect, then the solution to that is for me to do everything in my power to get the people on my side elected into office so they can pass laws to protect the things that I want them to protect. But then your counter argument is, okay, but when we get elected next, we're going to break all those laws because we don't think that they were more. So, yeah, there is no solution to that. This is why I come back to there is no solution to that. If that's going to be the way we operate from now on, just like, get your side elected, pass a bunch of laws to protect the things you care about, then the other side comes into office and breaks all the laws you just passed in the last few years. Okay, well, if that's what we're doing, then again, I only see one end to that, not the talking it out end.
yeah. I guess we can just wait and see, man.
We'll see.
All right. Well, I appreciate your cordialness, and I might come back at some point.
Alrighty.